Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the story of Joseph before the Pharaoh of Egypt, Genesis chapters 40 and 41, in our continuing study of the book of Genesis. We left off where Joseph had been sold into slavery in Egypt, and then from there he had been falsely accused and thrown into prison. And now he finds himself coming into contact with two other prisoners who were thrown into prison. They are the officials from Pharaoh's court. They are the cupbearer and the baker. And Joseph is put into their keeping, as it were. He's going to be a slave to the two of them. And I guess you could say perhaps he has oversight, but more specifically, he's meeting to their needs. And then they have dreams. And dreams in Egypt were thought to be specially significant, perhaps messages from God. Now, when I have a dream, it usually isn't a message from God. Usually it's, if it's some sort of strange dream, it's because I had something strange to eat for dinner the night before. But in their case, it is a message from God. And Joseph is able to explain what the dream means. So that in the case of the cupbearer, he's had a dream of 3 branches on a budding vine. He squeezes the grapes into the Pharaoh's cup, and he puts the cup into the Pharaoh's hand, and Joseph tells him that means that he's going to be released in 3 days, and he will be back to serving the Pharaoh. Meanwhile, the baker also has a dream. In his dream, he sees 3 baskets of bread that are placed upon his head, and they're food for Pharaoh, and birds come and eat out of the basket. And Joseph says, well, you're going to be released in 3 days, but it won't be a release from prison. You'll be taken out and killed. You'll be executed. And sure enough, each dream comes to pass. And so Joseph turns to the cupbearer and asks, only please keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house, this prison. And yet, when it comes to pass, and it does, verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, sort of out of sight, out of mind, and forgot him. Well, 2 years passed. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And now the Pharaoh of Egypt, the king of all of Egypt, has a dream, and nobody can interpret the dream. In Egypt, we're given to understand from ancient records that the Egyptians had these big books of dream interpretations. And if you dreamt about you dreamt about a street, then maybe that had to do with the journey in life or something like that. And you would look up the dream, and you would see what its interpretation was. But the Pharaoh's dream was so out of the ordinary, it didn't fit anything that they had in their book. And so nobody was able to interpret it, and nobody wants to venture an uneducated guess. And so he has not just a dream, 2 dreams, and in the one dream, 7 fat cows are there by the banks of the Nile, and they're eaten by 7 gaunt cows, 7 skinny cows. And in the second dream, there's 7 plumps of ears of grain that are swallowed by 7 thin ears of grain. And that's a troubling dream, both of these, and the Pharaoh doesn't know what to make of them. And so a call goes out, and meanwhile, in the midst of this, the cupbearer suddenly is reminded, wait a minute, there's a fellow that was able to interpret my dream, and he mentions it to the Pharaoh, and they send for Joseph. So we read in chapter 41, verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon, and when he had shaved himself, now he knows better than to come into Pharaoh looking like he's been in a dungeon. And so he cleans himself. The Egyptians, they prize this, the maxim that cleanliness is next to godliness is not in the Bible, but it would have been in the Egyptian Bible if they'd had one, and they didn't. So he shaved and changed his clothes, and he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, but no one can interpret it, and I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph answers the Pharaoh, saying, it's not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. God is able to give interpretations. Joseph he's really no one, but God is able to give interpretations to such questions. And he's going to give Pharaoh a favorable answer, a shalom answer, an answer of wellness. Maybe we would translate that a wellness of peace, an answer of peace. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. Perhaps this is why he had the dream twice, so that he wouldn't think it's just one of those strange dreams that you have when you eat something funny the night before. But this was something that was confirmed by God. Now let the Pharaoh look for a man, discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. You see what's going to happen. There's going to be 7 good years, and they will be followed by 7 very harsh years of famine. And so Joseph's advice, let Pharaoh look for a man, discerning and wise, let him set him over the land of Egypt, let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, let him exact a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. You're going to collect 20% taxes. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land will not perish during the famine. Well, the Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit, an Elohim sort of idea?" So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has informed you of all of this, there's no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you." And so Joseph goes from prison, from a slave in prison, to being the number 2 man in all of Egypt. And so Joseph begins to bring about his 5-step plan. First of all, remember, it was to find a discerning and wise man and place him over Egypt. And Joseph becomes that man. And then to appoint overseers over the land, and Joseph does that. And then to collect a fifth of the produce during the 7 years of plenty, and Joseph does that. And he stores up the food in Pharaoh's cities, which, you have these treasure cities, these storage cities, and finally to use and or sell the stored food during the famine. And that famine's going to affect Egypt, but it will affect the entire Middle East, and it will cause the brothers of Joseph living far off in Canaan to get up and come to Egypt, where they will encounter Joseph. And we'll look at that story next time. But notice how that sometimes the plan of God, even in the hard times, even in the difficult times, are meant to bring us face to face with Him. And that is going to be the story of the last part of the Joseph narrative. Well, when the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. Is there a famine going on in your life? Could it be that the Lord is moving you to come into His presence so that you might have a special encounter, so that you might have, yes, even a reconciliation with Him? You think about that.